r/AskReddit. What is the most hilarious historical fact you know? Notorious pirate/pirate hunter Benjamin Hornigold once attacked a ship just to steal all of the crew members' hats. His men had gotten drunk and lost their hats during a party the night before and decided to board a ship to get replacements. I know this sounds silly, but I can't imagine working on board a ship in the blinding sun without a hat. While hungover. r/short scary stories. In Pompeii they molded penis shapes into the cobblestone roads to point the way to the brothel. Follow the yellow dick road. Prick. Many of the streets in Monterey, California are named after prostitutes. The local madam kept the town out of bankruptcy on a few conditions and named the streets after her favorite workers. Steinbeck would be proud. I read 2/3 of that book and my dog decided it needed to die. Brazil and France almost went to war because they had a disagreement about lobsters. The event is known as the Lobster War. France thought lobsters swim there for they were above Brazilian soil and could be fished by any vessel, and Brazil thought lobsters crawled on the ocean's floor, therefore are Brazilian property. Brazil's foreign affairs minister had this to say about it: "The attitude of France is inadmissible, and our government will not retreat. The lobster will not be caught." It ended when they agreed that actually lobsters don't crawl nor swim. They leap. Sounds like something I would fight about. It'd be a good battle for about 2 seconds. Then, Goddamn Tim would gouge it and ruin all the fun. Julius Caesar had a letter dispatched via messenger while the Senate was in session. Convinced he was sending a message to his collaborators, Senator Cato the Younger demanded that the letter be read in open session to be entered into the annals of the Senate forever. Caesar allowed the letter to be read, and thus the most filthy love letter Caesar had written to his lover at the time. Cato's half-sister Servilia got entered into historical record forever. A burn so big, people still talk about it 2100 years later. Honestly, the late Republican period was such an utter political mess. This is probably one of the more tame things to happen in the Senate at the time. It created the situation that caused the term dictator to forever have a negative connotation from that point onward. So you're not wrong. Caesar did nothing wrong though. Ben Franklin used to leak government secrets while drunk to get laid. It got to the point he had to be watched/monitored outside of session. I actually think the more accurate fact is even funnier. He wasn't leaking government secrets. This was before the Declaration of Independence. There was no government. He was, effectively, a co-conspirator to a treasonous rebellion against the government. And he was trying to leverage that fact to get some poon. They were following him to try and make sure the entire American Revolution wasn't compromised by old slut puppy Grandpa Ben. He was literally 70 years old at this time, hunting the pussy. And he was almost certainly high on opium the whole time. Think Archer. I think I like him even more now. He is by far the coolest founding father. Literally wrote the book, A Letter on MILFs. A very seldom mentioned fact about Louis Riel, leader of the Métis Nation and most written about man in Canadian history, is that he was so devoted to his resistance movement that he sold everything he owned to get more ammunition for his soldiers. This included his clothing. When he was finally captured in Batoche, he was stark naked. No one really knows how long he'd been running around like that, since his soldiers had been shoot nails and wood out of their guns for quite a while before his capture. But the man probably had schizophrenia and this might have just been considered normal real behavior. Anyways, he was given a coat by one of the NW Mountain police officers that took him in. A few decades later, someone decided to build a statue of this scene. Real defeated with nothing but an overcoat on. I've never been able to find a picture of the actual statue, but it stood in Regina, Saskatchewan for years. One day, someone's child got a little too close to it, looked up the coat, and saw it was anatomically correct under the coat. The child ran off to tell their parents what they saw. The parents complained to the city, and the statue was taken down, and I have no bloody idea where it is today despite days of googling and calling around to try and find it, or just a picture of it for a paper I was writing. Where the hell is the naked statue of Louis real? Someone please tell me. I need to see it once in my life. Regina's Mackenzie Art Gallery. Really? I'm just 3 hours and a crossing guard away from a statue of a man in nothing but a coat. It has been all over Reddit forever, but the fact that Andrew Jackson's pet parrot was ejected from Jackson's funeral for swearing will never not make me giggle. I'm really sad the parrot didn't make it into the Andrew Jackson musical. I once dated someone who had a dog that was both named and looked like Andrew Jackson. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out and got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it. So he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable. Somehow, fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late because they were still using the Julian calendar in 1904. Seriously, this needs to be a movie. If this sounds familiar, I'm reposting myself. Charondas was a celebrated lawmaker in Catania, in present-day Sicily. Diodorus Siculus stated that Charondas issued a law that anyone who brought weapons into the assembly must be put to death. Charondas ran to the assembly one day because he was being ambushed and he wanted help. Unfortunately, he still had a sword still attached to himself, so in order to uphold his own law, he committed suicide. Commitment. Thanks to the Dollop podcast for this. But the Willie D, which was a U.S. Navy destroyer during World War II, amongst its exploits the ship dragged its anchor along several ships when leaving port, fired its 5-inch gun at their own base which landed in the base commander's yard during a dinner party, accidentally launched a torpedo at the battleship Iowa which was transporting the President of the United States, and was eventually sunk by a Japanese kamikaze plane that was shot down and sunk then detonated under the Willie D. Not really haha funny, but a surprising number of American submariners in WW2 were lost when they were accidentally left above decks as the submarine dove. This has been a head scratcher for me, but Willie D provides a possible answer. In a big war like that, many vessels must have been run by clowns. They actually were. The US Navy expanded from a show force to a massive size practically overnight. Someone had to man the ships. Anyone? Really? Suddenly, Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard, in command of a submarine hunter off the coast of San Diego, spent 2 days attacking a well-known magnetic deposit that was marked on his cards. In 897, the former pope, who had been dead for 7 months, was dug up and put on trial for perjury and heresy. He was convicted. Fun fact, after this happened on 2 separate occasions, the Vatican instated a law to say that former popes couldn't be prosecuted after they had died. Those bastards are just trying to evade justice. Galileo got persecuted because he personally dissed the Pope. Initially, the Catholic Church didn't mind that much about Galileo's heliocentric model, telling him to only assert it as a model instead of as fact. It was only after writing the philosophical book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, where he put Pope Urban VIII's views and arguments into the mouth of the layman character, Simplicio, that the church took it personally. Darwin spent 3 days on the ship trying to figure out how to use a hammock when he went to the Galapagos Islands. He kept trying to get in legs first. Ultimately, he had to pull it taut enough that it was totally flat and didn't swing. Also, he had no knowledge of how to send samples back to England and just randomly shoved dead animals into boxes. Often the scientist who received them couldn't even tell what the hell the samples were. Finally, he accidentally ate a bird that he'd specifically been on the lookout for. And once he realized, he boxed up the head and wings and sent those back. In the 1920s, radium had recently been discovered, and it was seen similarly to how titanium is seen now. People back then didn't know that radiation was harmful. In fact, many thought it was healthy. Just like today, many radium branded products back then quite fortunately contained no such radium. Some unfortunately did. Some were in practicum harmless, such as watches that had radium coated paint that glowed in the dark. The production of these, however, didn't last too long, as the women who painted these watches would lick the brush to get them to a fine point. You can see where that went. Other companies had products that were all in all quite disturbing. One such company thought it would be a good idea to make a little pouch for men to store a fair amount of radium right up against their reproductive organs. Again, you can see where that went. Radium toothpaste, radium condoms, radium bathtub sink. It's all energizing. Yes, those were sold back in the days. Sold by Goop. British Navy in WW1 had battleships disguised as passenger and merchant ships, with some of the sailors cross-dressing as women. This was to entice German U-boats to surface, as they would frequently attack unarmed and unescorted merchant ships. British Navy in WW1 had battleships disguised as passenger and merchant ships, with some of the sailors cross-dressing as women. Seriously though, Britain, what is it with you and men cross-dressing? It's a Royal Navy tradition. During WW2, New Zealand had sent all of its forces to Europe/Africa to battle the Germans, so when Japan entered the war, NZ felt a lot more vulnerable, seeing as it practically had no real defenses to throw back an invasion. Seeing as the war was being fought on the other side of the planet, NZ was extra worried, as we had no tanks, and NZ as we didn't produce any at this time. Our response was to develop a homemade tank built on top of an old tractor chassis. The end product was a hilariously slow, underarmed, UN maneuverable tank that wasn't going to stop any enemy force. When the tank was unveiled by its creator Bob Semple, Parliament laughed at him, to which he responded, "Well, I don't see you guys coming up with anything better." In the end, the Semple tank never saw combat, and the tanks were converted back into tractors, as it was thought they would help the war effort better that way. Saying that though, Japan never did invade NZ, so maybe the Semple tank did its job so good it scared Japan away. My favorite part is that it appears as if it was made out of corrugated iron, like someone just tore down their shed and added it to their tractor. Let's be honest, That's probably what he did. There was an actual judge at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia to process unruly Eagles fans that were arrested during football games. Was Miracle Mike is a chicken in the 1950s, I think, that was headless. He went on tour, and he is from Colorado. He could be fed by using a dropper and little seeds. Eventually, he died because he suffocated on some food or something. His death is controversial. You've reached the end. You're a star. Destroy the subscribe button for more like that.